Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here on the Greenery YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be showcasing our new BotaniCuts Lilacs dye and showing you how to do some coloring on that, how to assemble, and then we'll put together a card. So let's take a look at the dye. There's two different size clusters of lilacs, large and the small. There's individual little blooms that can be layered over the bases, and then there's two different stems as well as some just individual leaves. These are super easy to color. I'm going to be coloring mine today just using some Distress Oxide inks and a little sponge dauber. This is actually a little brush, and I'm just going to be adding a few flower center details with a pen. So I have, like I said, some Distress Oxide inks in some shades of purple and lavender. I have milled lavender, shaded lilac, and villainous potion. And I'm just going to start with the lightest color and just kind of start sponging some ink onto those die cuts. I have cut them from white cardstock and I have them on a sticky mat here nested inside the negative, which helps to kind of hold everything in place while I'm sponging some ink. I'm just going to get a good mix of color in different shades of these purples across the blooms. Lilacs have a lot of variance in color, so we're just going to try to mimic that look. I'm also going to pull out some green. I have peeled paint, and I'm going to sponge the tips of the clusters where the kind of the buds are here. A lot of times there's a little bit of green at the tips there where those buds are just kind of starting to open up. And so I'm going to take a little bit of green and just add some to those tips. So we're done inking those blooms. Now we're going to assemble them. And before I glue all of these little individual blooms onto the bases, I'm going to add a little bit of dimension to them. I have underneath here a foam mat. It's just kind of my crusty old foam mat. And I have a stylus. This is just a Fisker's rounded tip stylus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use my stylus and just poke down into the center of each one of those little blooms, and you can see how just doing that makes all those little petals pop up in lots of dimension. There's also some little buds that you can add to kind of the tips of these. There isn't really a set place for those to go. You can just add them to the bases as desired if you'd like to, or you can just use the little blooms. We're just going to be using the little blooms. Before we add the blooms to these bases, we're going to make sure that all of these little inner cuts are poked out. So I have a paper piercing tool, and I'm just going to be using that to poke out all those little interior cuts. So we have this really nice little detailed base. And I'll repeat that and do the same thing with the smaller one. If you are doing multiples, like if you're making a bunch of these, you can speed this up by stacking them on top of each other and poking out all the interiors on multiple pieces if you just stack those up. So now we're going to attach or glue all of these little blooms to the bases. I have my precision glue press here. This is for Sweet Petunia. I love this tool. It's super handy for working with tiny die cuts. Really precise. And all I'm going to do here is there is really no lining up to do with these little blooms onto the bases. I'm just going to add dots of adhesive just here and there everywhere across the base lilac here. And then I'll just go ahead and layer these. Like I said, I'm not worrying about lining anything up. You just want to keep adding these little blooms until your lilacs are as full as you'd like them to be. So our lilac blooms are assembled, and to finish them off, I'm just going to take a fine liner pen and add some dots to the centers of the blooms. And now we're going to move on to the foliage. Once again, we're just going to be sponging inks with a little finger sponge brush here. I have peeled paint oxide ink, and then I also have a deep green. This is Rainforest Versafine Clair. I'm going to be using to add some depth of color to those as well. So I'm going to start with the peeled paint and get just a good base of color down on my white die cuts. Once again, I have them nested in the negative, so they just kind of stay put. I have them on a sticky mat. These sticky mats that I use, you can use a couple different things. These are actually just from a Cricut cutting machine. They're kind of just the off-brand. I cut them up, use them to hold things in place while I sponge. Misty, the Sweet Petunia, the makers of the Misty, also make some sticky mats that fit inside the Misty. So they're basically the same thing. You can use those as well. And so we have a nice base of lighter green. I'm going to take my deeper green ink and add that as well, kind of to the center of the stems and the clusters so that we get some nice shading along the leaves. Lilacs have that nice deep green foliage to them, so it's kind of what we're going for. So we have everything all inked and ready to go. The lilac heads can be mixed and matched. Either one can go with either stem, depending on kind of what direction you want them to go and your design. So I'm going to wait to attach those until we build our card. So we created some really pretty purple lilacs. I'm also wanting to create some white lilacs, which are never just white. You need to add a little bit of color. So I'm going to be just sponging a tiny bit of yellow. This is antique linen, and then also just a little bit of kind of a brighter green to these petals and to these blooms. Basically using the same process we did with the purple ones, just going to be using just a real light hand on the ink. So I have a background here that I ink blended with some tumbled glass and broken china inks. I want to create kind of a cluster of lilacs up in the corner that looks like it's kind of fading down my card. So I wanted to add some color over here, almost look like a blue sky behind our lilacs. So I created more lilac blooms off camera so that I had a nice little assortment to play around with. And I've been arranging those on my background into kind of this nice falling pattern across my card front, and I'm liking this arrangement. So now I'm going to go ahead and take some press and seal. This is just the kind you keep in your kitchen. It has that sticky backing on it. This is such a great trick. Learned this online from fellow crafters. I think Lori Willison might have been one of the first to do the press and seal trick. So lay that over top of my lilac cluster to hold everything in place so that I can glue those down without messing up my arrangement. So that allows me to just take it off as one whole piece and add some adhesive to the back side of those. So we just want to get a good amount of adhesive so that we can attach this to our card base, and then we can go ahead and add more as needed once we take off our press and seal. I can go ahead and also just take some individual leaves and fill in some other areas here if I want to add some more foliage. All right, so then I'm going to take a scissors and flip my card around and just trim off anything outside the edges of my card base. As a final step, I'm going to add a sentiment, and this says Hope Blooms, and this sentiment is from our new Spring Snowdrop set. I've die cut the word hope using the coordinating Spring Snowdrops die. I'm going to stamp the word blooms and then attach the word hope as a die cut. And there, our card is finished. Pretty for spring. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to our new BotaniCuts Lilacs die. It's the newest addition to our BotaniCuts die collection, and this will be available from thegreenery.com beginning on Thursday, February 29 at 10 a.m. Eastern Time.